change. Hey, welcome to FailCraft. I'm Hammy. Hope you're well and good. Now, there's been big news. It's the beginning of February 2016. We're going to be quickly, for the next 10 or so minutes, covering one particular element of the Hearthstone news release today, and that Standard Mode has been created, which is going to be a yearly change of formats and sets in Hearthstone, and it is going to not include or remove old adventures not from the current or previous year, and expansions from the current or previous year, which will be very, very interesting. So this happens a lot in paper card games and other card games. It keeps the card pool fresh. It prevents power creep of cards. It means that as a game designer, if you're Blizzard, you can try and make sure that you keep the pool fresh and interesting. It also means that you can try and make more creative mechanics in the game without having to worry about how they interact with your massive history. And then last but not least, it helps new players get into the game more easily because they don't need to have so many cards. So that is Standard. You'll be able to ladder in Standard. If you're a competitive player, Standard is the format of the Hearthstone Championship from when it releases, along with the new spring expansion this year. But don't worry, you can still play with all of your cards in Wild. Check out our other video below for more details on that. I'm not going to go through all the details now, but if you check out the video link below or subscribe to our channel, you can find out about those. What we're going to discuss in this video, as I jump into the game, is a couple of things. It is how, if you want to play Standard, how is the removal of Curse of Naxxramas and Goblins and Gnomes going to affect you? So when Standard becomes a format this year, you can see that Naxx and Goblins and Gnomes were the two oldest expansions and indeed adventures. Last year we had BlackRock, Grand Tournament, League of Explorers, all that kind of jazz, but Naxx and Goblins and Gnomes are being rotated out. So what are we going to see removed from the game, and how is this going to affect current decks? So bearing in mind that, of course, Standard Mode will be launched with a new expansion or some cards. So we're going to have new cards that we need to add in. The second piece of news Blizzard also gave was that they're going to be revisiting basic and classic cards. So it could be that class cards and all kinds of things get changes. So we can't too heavily at the moment Theorycraft what deck archetypes could come up because there are new cards and basic and class card changes. However, what we can think of is how current decks will be affected. So for the next 10 or so minutes, we're going to run over this and have a think. Firstly, let's have a look at Naxx. Now, Naxx had a lot of nuts cards in. There were some really crazy cards in Naxx, even just going through the neutrals. Let's have a think about how these affect various archetypes. So many decks open with Zombie Jail to counter aggro. Undertaker was +1 attack and 1 health before it got nerfed. Remember that when this initially launched, it was +1 attack and 1 health, I do believe, if my memory was right. So this got nerfed because Death Rattle decks with Undertaker became so strong. But when you look at the neutrals of Naxxramas, think of how many of these are key to various decks. Zombie Chat was used by so many decks to counter early aggression and to mop up the board. But Naxx itself had a lot of early game aggression. The Haunted Creeper, synergizing so well in Hunter decks, being buffed in various token decks and surviving so that it could stay on top of the board. Massive card, that's gone. We also say goodbye to Mad Scientist. Mad Scientist used by mages primarily to pull in secrets. Hunters, this card, any deck that ran secrets would use Mad Scientist very heavily. So Mad Scientist is now gone from Standard Mode. If you want to play Standard ladder, it's not going to be in there. The Nerubian Egg, loved by many people. Zoos would use this with power overwhelming to trade. Paladins in recent seasons have been using this in a Secret Paladin as a trading card because you could buff it. So basically anything that liked enjoying sending a little buff would really love Nerubian Egg. So you can see that Naxxramas in itself, looking back on it, contained a lot of aggression. The Unstable Ghoul, very beloved of Grim Patrons for triggering and protecting your Armor Smiths, your Acolytes of Pain, and also creating all of those Grim Patrons by dealing 1 damage to all minions. That's gone as well. So we're losing a lot of cards already just from the first page of neutrals that are quite staple in a bunch of decks. I'm going to pull out the Death Lord, situational. If you watch FailCraft a bunch, I hate it hates me, but in priest decks and in certain other decks, the Death Lord used to anchor the early game, a very strong early game tank, would very much nail a lot of stuff together and keep your table alive before you could do things. Shade of Naxx will drop from Druid. Druid is not going to suffer hugely depending on what the new cards are, I feel, the mid-range combo Druid, but we'll have a look at that shortly. But the Shade of Naxx will be a bit of a miss for Druid. This was used a lot in mid-range and combo Druids because it sticks in there, and indeed, because its stealth just gets bigger until it gets destroyed. Stalag and Fugen, used in some current Warlock decks, particularly with Reno, so will be missed, not common. Here's a biggie. Lotheb. Now, Dantier in chat said, calling out Lotheb. It's just such a solid 5-drop. And denying the spells would delay a lot of spells and combo decks. Mage decks would be denied with this. Mid-range druids would be denied with this. He's 5/5/5 and has an excellent effect. He's pretty much a 5-drop in so many different decks. You could just slot him into a deck. I'd probably say he's the second most splashable card compared to Doc Boom. That's a big statement. I'm going to have to go back on that. But he was so splashable. Sludge Belcher, as also Dantiero mentioned in the stream, do not give him a root beer. Sludge Belcher overtook several tanks that were very popular. The Sunwalker at 6 mana with Divine Shield for attack 5 health. The Stengen Shieldmaster at 4 mana with slightly less on the stats front. The Sludge Belcher was so good, or is so good, because he takes double the effort to get through. You need to use 2 sets worth of attacks, and he basically soaks up 7 damage. To be able to actually be punched through. So a massive tank, and again he was a very splashable drop. He would stop aggro in its tracks. He would be put in so many decks as a way to anchor the table, to secure your play against mega aggression, or to pull together your mid-lane table before you could push into the late game. He will be a miss. Galdazad saw use, was a good card, but there were a lot better late game legendaries. He was kind of cool. Let's have a look through Deathbite. Oh wow, Warriors lose Deathbite, that's crazy. Control Warriors use Deathbite, Patron Warriors use Deathbite to trigger. Patron's going to hurt. Losing Deathbite will hurt Patron, for sure. It's going to be interesting to see how this meta moves. But yeah, bye-bye Deathbite. The Voidcaller, a wonderful card for Warlocks, using them to trade. So the Dreadsteed decks of recent joy rely on Voidcaller, but Voidcaller would also be used to pull in Mal'Ganis. They'd also be used to, not Jiraxxus ideally, but also not, but the, I can't remember the charging demon. The charging 5/7 demon, but Voidcaller will be used to pull in demons for a Warlock deck, and it's a solid minion in itself, so that's going to be a miss to sort of the mid-rangey kind of Warlock style. Reincarnate, not so bad. Anubar, not so bad. Dark Cultist, key in the early game Priest, that's going to be very, very missed. The fact that this was such a strong card stats-wise, and then could also buff a minion, meant that generally, if you're playing against a Priest, you didn't want the Priest 3 health to go off. If you could help it, you'd have to kill everything else before the Dark Cultist, if you could. PG says Doomguard. That's the minion I was thinking of when I was talking about the Voidcaller. Doomguards, you dare summon me. That's exactly it. Avenge, well, Pallies are certainly going to miss that one. When one of your minions dies, give a random friendly minion 3/2, much beloved from the Secret Pally. The Secret Pally is going to take quite a smack with that disappearing. But there are still other secrets that can be useful. Avenge is nasty because it makes the board a lot stronger. Duplicate was fun for mages. That's no longer in standard. When a friendly minion dies, put 2 copies of it into your hand. Teching that in, like if a Sludge Belcher got killed and you actually had to then start playing more of those, it was very, very nasty indeed. So goodbye to Duplicate in standard for mages. That's not going to be going. The Web Spinner, a lot of people in chat having a chat about this one, and Web Spinners indeed are going to be gone. Adding that random beast, you can push it forward. It's very, very awesome, which is kind of cool. But not only dropping it on turn 1, you could buff it, but then that random beast could be everything nice or everything nasty in equal measure. But Web Spinner was great in terms of opening up as a hunter and early game trades, as well as potentially even giving you buff targets for your Houndmaster. So hunters will miss Web Spinner. Poison Seeds was interesting AoE removal for Druids. So, how is this going to affect decks? Well, I feel that we need to take a look at Goblins versus Gnomes pretty quickly before we come back and try and summarise potential changes in the new standard mode. But we can already see that a little bit of counter early game aggro has gone, but a lot of early game value and trading aggro is going with Naxx. A lot of these cards are very powerful. Mages and any secrets-based class takes a hit with Mad Scientists, aggro-based decks, and value decks, trading more for less. The Haunted Creeper, the value of the stats because you get the 2 summon Death Rattles. Nerubian and getting that Nerubian. The Ghoul for Grim Patron. These will all be missed. A general mid-game anchorage in the form of Lotheb for Spell Denial and Sludge Belcher for those tanks are going to be missed. Early game Priest Tech and Deathlord, and then also the Dark Cultist are going to be missed. Druids will miss Shade of Naxx, but that can be replaceable. And then going through the classes, a loss for Warrior in both Control and Grim Patron forms. Patron is going to hurt. Warlocks lose a little bit of mid-game versatility. Priests lose a little bit of early game value there as well. Paladin's Secret becomes a little bit less strong with the removal of Avenge. Mages remove some annoyance in terms of Duplicate. And the early game Web Spinner is no longer there for Hunters. Right, that's option number 1. Now we have to do the task of Goblins versus Gnomes, an entire expansion being removed. And this is going to be interesting because this is going to rotate out a family. And as PG mentioned in chat, we're going to be saying a big bye to Mech. Mech is going to be a thing here. So we'll go through this expansion, and then to finally wrap up, we'll have a think about how this will affect certain decks as well as certain heroes. Let's go through the neutrals first. So, Goblins vs Gnomes introduced the Mech core. Mech Mage was a thing with GvG. Clockwork Gnome, gone. Cogmaster, gone. Annoytron, gone. Explosive Sheep as tech. Mech Warper, Micro Machine. All of those were the core of the early game Mech strategy. And with Mech Mage, making the draws and then going with Toshly and the spare parts synergy, that's a real hit to any mech-based strategy. Maybe we'll see new mechs, maybe we won't. But at the moment, the Mech Mage and the Mech core of decks that used to be played is definitely going bye-bye. All of these I would probably call pretty average. I'm going to call out Hobgoblin. He was used in various Zoo decks to buff the 1-drops that Zoos would like, as well as, remember, it was playing a minion from hand. So, goodbye to mechs, but also Hobgoblin was nice in buffing lots of little early game minions that were kind of quite fun. Other times in terms of mechs, Spider Tank, a Mech Mage core, Enhancer Meccano is pretty fun. It's also worth calling out Jeeves. He was an interesting card. I mean, he recently saw a lot of play in various egg druids and various sort of token decks that would flood the game in the early game, flood the table in the early game, looking for that Force of Nature Savage Roar in the case of Mech Druid, and then Jeeves would refill the hand when everything was empty, and indeed some aggro decks would be totally removed. You totally empty your hand, and then you could just use Jeeves to top up. Goodbye Anti-Secret Tech in form of Kezan Mystic, splashed in some decks, particularly against Hunters when the metagame is heavy. Mech Yeti from Mech decks. The Piloted Shredder goes. This, a very strong, like Sludge Belcher, was such a good 5-drop. This is such a good 4-drop with the Death Rattle values, something that random 2 cost. The Healbot, very much used in various decks, particularly before Reno. Reno is still going to be run a bunch, I think. The Healbot cycling out means there's a little bit less healing. So Reno is the big 1 heal, but a lot of people would pack 1 or 2 Healbots. Previously much loved, of course, in your handlocks, your late game Warlock decks that you'd try and get rid of. Fel Reaver, hyper-aggressive, used in recent Silence decks as well as other decks too. Of course, discarding loads of your hand wasn't great. Piloted Sky, the older brother of the Piloted Shredder, and of course summoning at random 4 costs, so goodbye to another great mech as well. And Toshly used in some priest decks, also Mech Mage decks too. Here we go. This is going to be a love and hate affair. Some people will be like, I'm so glad he's gone. Some people will be very sad that Dr. Balance is gone. But Dr. Balance, Dr. Seven, whatever you want to call him, the legendary that everyone kind of had to craft. It was when people come and ask you, how do I get into Hearthstone? And you say, well, the first thing you do is craft Dr. Boom. Because pretty much any deck will involve him in some form or another. Marvel at his might. He is gone. I like the Foe Reaper. He was hard to play unless you were ramping him, but I think he was a card that was nice. I like the area damage, also the minions next to whomever he attacks. But goodbye Dr. Balance is the main one from that page. Clockwork Giant didn't see huge play, but again I liked it. You know, the idea was nice against costing less if your opponent had a full hand. Let's go and have a look at the class cards. What is going from class cards? Wow. Shield Maiden has kind of become staple of Control Warriors, but Control Warrior will continue to function without it. It was a very strong drop. The effects and stats were just so strong. Iron Juggernaut was nice for that fun mine. Warlocks lose Dark Bomb. Interesting. Warlocks are going to suffer. Implosion, very common in a lot of Warlock decks at the moment. Not only the Zoo varieties, but also indeed the mid-ranges and then the Renos. Implosion is just great because it removes minions and gives ball control to a Warlock that they can buff. Dark Bomb was early game control. Warlocks are going to miss. Mal'Ganis goes. Forgot that he was Goblins versus Gnomes. Your other demons having 2/2 in your heroes, I mean, that kills off demon Warlocks a bit because Mal'Ganis was great in terms of survivability in the late game. So he is gone. He is ripperoni. Shamans. I've just remembered that. How embarrassing. I may have missed some cards that I haven't actually crafted or indeed got. Let's have a look. Gnomish Experimenter and Goblin Sapper. We're not actually going to miss. The Blingatron, he's gone. He was interesting in a couple of priest decks and tech decks because you'd swap out people's weapons. Nothing where his Beast Destruction is gone. Myrmidon's Head, Gazlo, of course used in Mech Mages too. Moga the Ogre was fun. Trugzor the Earthnator was fairly solid, but was more of a splasher attack rather than the standard play. And of course Sneed's a good late game finisher, that's also gone. Mechan Engineer Thermoplag, he's a bunch of fun. I used to enjoy him a lot in Arena. So, back to the world of Shaman. Self-in Spirit Walker, very, very fun, and you'd often see him popping up from the Murloc Knight, summoning random Murlocs. But Crackle, aggro Shamans are a thing on the ladder right now, and Crackle is certainly going to be causing, has been causing a bit of pain ever since because of the sheer splashability with spell damage as well. The aggro Shaman just throwing loads of spells at your face, that tones it down a bit. The Whirling Zap was great if you could protect it. Neptulon, there was a Murloc Shaman that was doing the rounds for a while. Guess I'm probably going to disenchant Neptulon for a bit of dust. Bye bye Neptulon, it was nice to know you. Ancestor's Call had some fun uses, but Shaman, mainly Crackle, I think is going to be a big miss there. Into Rogue. Bye bye Tinker's Sharp Sword Oil. Tinker's Oil and Oil Rogue decks have been a thing ever since Goblins vs. Gnomes came out. Going to the late game, keeping the control, using Blade Flurry to do the damage, and then also smacking down for a little bit more pressure as well. That aside, not massive losses here. Sabotage would occasionally get smashed in, but really Tinker's removes the Oil Rogue archetype, certainly in the current form that it's been in anyway, so that's a good buy. Naira used by a lot of priests. Priests will miss this to a degree. There's two schools of debate between using Circle of Healing and Orkanai. Hello Umbra, welcome. Going to miss the Belcher a ton, certainly. But Light of the Nari, restoring 3 or dealing damage 3, that kind of thing. Hello. Why do I have 3 oils? That's a great question. New format announced. Muster from the new expansion on. But you can, long story short, if you've just joined us, new format announced for Hearthstone. There's 2 formats. Wild is a new one. Welcome to everyone joining. Really good to see you with us. By the way, sorry that I've not been able to say hello to you all in chat. We're of course live, twitch.tv/FailCraft Casts. If you're on YouTube, do come join us sometimes. Don't worry about it, Monster. But you can check the other video. There are 2 formats. There's a wild format where you can play everything that you want to play, and that will continue. There's going to be a standard format which removes old expansions from a year ago. So if it's not been released this year or last year, then it gets removed, and that happens every year from now on. But that's for this format, which is more competitive. You can play it, you can legend in either Wild, which is like unlimited, or this new standard format, so you don't lose anything. It's just an optional different format you can try if you want to. Think of it like that. But it will be the competitive format for Hearthstone. So, Velen's Chosen, missed by priests. I'm going to miss that. Used in a lot of control priests, Chinese, Japanese priests as the deck went. Goodbye to Light Bomb. Priest's big late game control is getting nerfed, so it's going to be interesting. There's a fair amount of control for some classes being removed, so some classes are going to suffer a bunch. Priest feels a bit of pain here. The current control priests are going to have a few bits of pain. Vol'jin was a nice card. He was techie. It would be a shame to see him go. What do Paladins lose? Whoa, Paladins hurt. Pain for Paladins. Shielded Minibot. The early game trading value, gone. Coghammer, giving a random friendly minion Divine Shield and Taunt. Shielding the Minibot and keeping the early game, gone. Muster for Battle. Grabbing the early game control with Paladin, gone. Quartermaster buffing those recruits, also gone. Paladin is going to be reinvented. We're going to see a new form, a new feel of Paladin for sure. And we're going to have to see whether mid-range still processes. I think mid-range can process to a degree. But a lot of early game pressure and strength of Paladin is being ripped out going to be ripped out in the new standard, so it's going to be interesting to see what comes in. Big news in the next expansion. Mage, so much going here as well. Flame Cannon in the early game. Tempo Mage is going to suffer with that. Unstable Portal. Unstable Esports Portal is going. People will miss this. Muster a Knife Juggler. Yeah. No Muster a Knife Juggler anymore for Paladin, certainly, says Umbra. Unstable Portal goes. Snow Chugger, Mech Mage, but also freezing people, that's gone. Echo Video I kind of liked. Blast Mage. Mech Mage is just like totally not a thing anymore. In standard, anyway. So, goodbye Mech Mage, but a few hurts to Tempo Mage. Mage gets off a little bit more likely. What does Hunter lose? Hunter's actually okay from this perspective. Glaive Zuka is the main thing for Face Hunter, but Face Hunter is still going to be alive and well depending on what they tweak from the basic and classic cards. Yeah, Hunter's not going to be too sad. Feign Death Hunters, bye-bye. Going to be a bit of a shame. Last but not least, Druid. What is Druid going to lose? Druid, again, is kind of alright. Grove Tenter got replaced by Darnassus Aspirant, really, in terms of mana acceleration. None of these others are hugely competitive cards, I'm going to go ahead and say. Or indeed, played a whole bunch. So, Cobra Shot, yeah, Cobra Shot, I just didn't know whether we could reconcile for the sheer amount of... for the stats and the damage it did. Just wasn't quite sure how value it was, but we'll see. So there we go. That is the Goblins versus Gnomes losses. So folks, we're going to be wrapping up in just a sec. The final thing I'm going to do, get a confession. I think I had everything from Naxx, right, because it was an adventure. But we did go through with crafting and have a look at Goblins versus Gnomes and see anything we missed. So, Druid and Hunter Unchained, said Monsterpod. The final thing we're going to do for this little video, folks, is to have a little think and think, right, okay, remember that there are going to be changes to basic and classic cards as well, so we can't predict what decks will be created. Remember, there's going to be a new expansion, new cards coming out this spring. So we can't anticipate what will be new decks just yet, but what we can look at is what will certainly be different. We don't know what's going to replace it, but we can certainly have a think right now, fresh with this news, as to what's going to be going. So we're finally going to wrap up with 5 minutes or so's worth of thoughts as to what's going to be going. So, Mech Mage. Mech Mage is gone. Goblins versus Gnomes and the Mech family have taken a massive hit. So, Aggro Mech Shaman, anything vaguely mechy is going to take a blow. For sure with GvG. With Curse of Naxxramas, we've had a look at early game value and aggression, things like the Haunted Creeper, the Mad Scientist, the Nerubian Egg, all of these strong death rattle cards that have previously, either for specific classes or in general, managed to give people great table value and be able to make very, very mana efficient, beneficial trades. These are also going to be going. We've seen a little bit of removal of certain strength in some classes. Control Warrior loses a few bits. The removal of Deathspite and Shield Maiden is painful. Warlock takes a bit of a hit in the mid-range for sure. Implosion, Dark Bomb, and also the removal of Void Caller, as well as Mal'Ganis. Various Warlock, archetypes are going to take a little tweak. A highly aggressive Shaman style is going to have a little bit of a tweak as Crackle is gone. But the Oil Rogue, with Tinker Sharp's Oil being removed, rogues will have to look to a different format. That's not going to be quite as strong as it used to be, although there'll be ways around it. Control Priest takes a few blows. Things like Velens for buffs, Light Bomb as well. Priest lose a bit of control. Early to mid-range Paladin aggression and table control. Shielded, Coghammer, Muster for battle. And then Quartermaster if you like playing this sort of Hand of Crucible, more of a mid-range style, as well as... Let's not forget Venge from Curse of Naxxramas being removed. So Secret Pally takes a bit of a tweak, but also Paladin's early to mid-game aggression is really going to be affected by all of that being removed. Changes to tempo, we've already seen that because of the mechs being removed in Goblins vs. Gnomes, Mech Mage is kind of being tweaked away. That's not going to be a thing unless there's a whole bunch of mechs in the new expansion. We'll have a think about Hunters and Druids, but as we just quickly flick through Goblins vs. Gnomes before going back to Curse of Naxx, we are going to miss some tech cards. We're going to miss a little bit of anti-secrets. Remember the value. The value piece, I think, is key. The value of Curse of Naxx with the early game aggression and the value of Goblins vs. Gnomes with the mid-game. Anti-Killbot keeping yourself alive in those later decks. Piloted Shredder, Piloted Sky Golem, the 2-for-1 trays that these enabled. The ever-present Dr. Boom in a whole bunch of things. There are major decks being ripped away from the major cards being ripped away that were previously just core to so many decks. If we finally review Naxx, some aggro variants are going to struggle a little bit. Grim Patron, of course, with Naxx loses Deathspite, loses Unstable Ghoul. It will still run, but those two cards were very useful in terms of triggering a whole bunch of things. The early game aggression, as we previously mentioned, and value trading of Haunted Creeper and Nerubian Egg, and the utility of pulling out things for Mad Scientist. But we're also going to lose a little bit of counter early game aggression in the removal of Zombie Chow. Shade of Naxx for Druid decks, Deathlord for Priest decks. Lotheb for pretty much any deck in terms of mid-game pinning, and the Sludge Belcher for countering aggro in the mid-game pin. 70 viewers, hype. Big welcome, everyone. Good to have you with. We're actually going to be finishing up in a few minutes, but I'll tell you how you can join us another time. Really good to have you here. Do come and join us another time if it's your first time joining us. We stream 3 nights a week, and we do news like this as well as playing a whole bunch of game too. So, in summary, we are losing Mech as a family for now. The Mech Mage is gone. There's a lot of aggression that's going to be removed from various decks. Grim Patron loses a couple of key cards but can live on. Mid-range and early game aggressive Warlock type decks, Demon-based decks will also take a few key nerfs. Void Caller, Implosion and such cards gone. There's no Tinker Sharp Sword Oil. Oil Rogue is going to be removed. Priests lose a few bits of control as well as good early to mid-game trading value and protection. So the Control Priest is going to change. It's not going to be the way it is now, the strength that it has now. Paladin loses a lot of early game aggression with the removal of Naxx and GvG. And then also secret-based styles will still exist, but with no Avenge, you lose one of the key secrets that is so amazing. Hey, welcome Niska. Duplicates. When a friendly minion dies, put 2 copies in your hand. Mages lose a bit in the tempo stage. Web Spinner. Add a random beast to your hand. Hunters still keep a reasonable core, but we'll go on to that as well as Druids. So, in summary, we're losing some early game aggression and value trades. There are a lot of mid-game key pinning cards that are being removed too. Mechs are just gone. Grim Patron takes a bit of a hit. Mid-range Warlocks take a bit of a hit. No Tinker Sharp Sword Oil anymore. Paladin early to mid-game aggression is very much changed. There's a lot of key Paladin cards in current decks that get removed as Goblins versus Gnome is going. And then what kind of stays the same? Well, anything that I haven't mentioned. I think the 2 key things are Hunters and Druids. If we have a look at Hunters and Druids, a lot of Hunters and Druids are based off various things around. If we have a look at mid-range Druid, there's a lot of mid-range Druid that sticks around here from basic cards and then also the new sets. So this kind of deck, there will be some cards that get subbed, Shade of Naxx, Piloted Shredder, but a lot of that is still going to stick around. Dr. Boom. There'll still be a mid-range Druid in some form or another. Cool. So, thank you very much for tuning in. I do think that Druid initially, but we don't know we don't know what's being released in the new expansion, which could change everything on its head, and we also don't know what changes are coming to basic and classic cards, so that might also change as well. So we can't entirely know what the new decks will be, but we can certainly see from what we know right now what's going to be affected. So what's not going to be affected? Druids and Hunters so far. But who knows? They might get better or worse cards. We'll have to see what happens. Reno is still going to kick around. There's still going to be Reno-based styles for sure, I think. And the rest we're going to have to think about in more detail as and when we get more news. But an exciting time for Hearthstone. If you just tuned in, thank you very much for joining us. We're going to be signing off now, but we are live Monday, Wednesday and Friday, 7:30 p.m. So whatever time you are in the world, that's an hour ago your time. But 7:30 p.m. UK, Monday, Wednesday and Friday. We do regular laddering, regular arenas and deck and theory crafting, all new player friendly, but we try and get as competitive as we can. So thank you very much for tuning in. Really excited. If you're on YouTube, what do you think about all of these new Hearthstone changes? We're now getting 18 deck slots. We're now going to be getting a brand new play mode, and then of course there's the new expansion that's coming soon, as well as potential changes to basic and classic cards. An exciting time to be alive. Let us know what you think if you're on YouTube in all of the comments below. It'd be really good to get your opinions. If you joined us on stream, do hit that follow button. Would be really good to see you another time. I've described our streaming schedule. You can see everything in the left and right columns. If you're on YouTube, come join us, twitch.tv/FailCraft Cast without the final S. Do sub to us on YouTube if you're watching. Comment below. We'd love to know what you think. At FailCraft Cast on Twitter. We always publish all our stream schedules there. Last but not least, the website, failcraft.org. Thanks very much for coming, everyone, and so much hype for 76 people. New record. Really, really good to have you all with if you're on stream. Long may it continue, and I'm really looking forward to doing so much more Hearthstone and all of the exciting stuff that's going to be coming in the coming weeks. So thanks very much for tuning in to FailCraft. This has been FailCraft, and as always, I've been Hammy. Take it easy.